Hi everyone and welcome back for another true crime video. If you are new to the channel and you haven't subscribed and you've come across this video, please do make sure you subscribe if you are into true crime videos, because that's what I'm going to be basing this channel on. I'm really close to 100 subscribers as well. So just before I get into the video, little disclaimer that there will be some quite gruesome parts, so if you're really not into like body dismemberment and things like that, then please do click away. I'd also like to mention that I mean no disrespect to the family involved at all. I'm basically just researching my findings and then putting it all into one video and then sharing it with you guys. So today's true crime video is something that I hadn't really heard too much about. A girl named Charlene Downes went missing in Blackpool in 2003 and was never seen again. This is actually one of the longest cases in Lancashire police history, and it actually led further to finding out more about child exploitation in Blackpool. It was the 1st of November 2003 and 14-year-old Charlene Downes got up in the morning as usual and put her Darren Day album on. She then finished getting ready and then headed off round to a friend's house. Her mum Karen Downes, her father Robert Downes, and then her two sisters and her brother all lived at the same house in Blackpool. As I say, it was a usual Saturday, and when Charlene had gone round to her friend's house, her mother Karen had headed out to go shopping. Once Karen returned from shopping, so did Charlene, which then Charlene said to her mother that she was going out later with her sister Becky at about tea time. So Karen, Charlene's mother, who works as a promoter for an Indian restaurant, headed off to work at about 5 PM. Also at 5 PM, Becky and Charlene also headed out. Later on into Karen's shift, she remembers that it was a cold November night, quite dark as the nights got darker a lot earlier, and Karen remembers seeing them crossing the road on Church Street. This was about 7:15 on the same night. Charlene and Becky were both seen by the mother happily walking across the road holding the McDonald's milkshake cups, as that's where they'd just been, like on their trip out. And then this is also shown on the CCTV, which I'm about to show you. This CCTV does link later on into the story, but it's like new evidence that's come out, that's been found just recently, so I thought it'd be worth putting it into the timeline. They had been to the promenade and then played in the arcade, on the fruit machines and everything, at Coral Island Amusement Arcade, and then headed off to McDonald's, and then later, which is when her mother had seen her. So Charlene and her sister went over to her mother all like cheerily and happily, like walking over, greeting her and everything, and her mum was like, "Oh, what are you up to now?" So Becky responded saying that she was actually going to leave now and go back home, and then Charlene said that she was going to go meet her two friends, Natalie and Natasha, who she'd already planned to go meet later on in the evening anyway. She said she was going to meet them off the number 2 bus and then to go around the area that they lived. Karen specifically told Charlene that she had to be home by 10 PM, and Charlene obviously reassured her, "Yeah, that's fine, I'll be in." So Charlene and her mother both waited at the bus stop from about 6:45 till 7 PM. At this point, her sister Becky had already gone home, so she'd already set off, leaving the two of them waiting at the bus stop. Charlene then went over to a phone box on Leopold Road to call and see where Natalie and Natasha was. A short while later, both the girls got off the bus to greet Charlene. Charlene ran over to the girls to greet them and then brought them back over to go speak to Karen. The girls all then said bye, and then Karen made sure that Charlene knew and remembered the 10 PM curfew that she'd given her. Charlene then obviously jokingly said, "I'll be fine," and then gave her mum a hug and a kiss goodbye. And then as they were walking off, turning around, all waving at her mum, like saying bye and everything. At around 9 PM, Charlene and her friends all went to the Carousel bar for a few drinks on the North Pier. They didn't stay in this bar for too long, and then shortly afterwards they headed out to the seaside arcades. After this, the three girls then headed back into the town centre before parting ways at Talbot Road. This was about 11 PM at night. Charlene had apparently told the two girls that she had to go back home and babysit. Charlene stayed with the girls before heading off a little while later to Count Street. Sorry if I'm pronouncing any of these street names wrong or any names throughout this video. So at 10 PM later that night, Karen had returned home from work, and then Robert was obviously there to greet her, but also said that Charlene hadn't returned home yet, which obviously made Karen feel a little bit anxious and a bit nervous. Karen was obviously panicking a little bit because it was noted that Charlene was the type of person to get in contact and let her parents know exactly where she was, what time she was coming in, and if there was going to be any trouble of her coming back at the time that she'd been set. And Charlene actually had a mobile phone to be able to contact her mother on, so that it was there for her to use to let her know an update, like I say, being really good with communication.
I got home at 10 o'clock and my husband Rob said, "Charlene's not in." And I said, "Charlene's not in, is she not? Where is she? She's not home." And he went, No. I said, "Oh my God, where can she be?" Because I said, she always come. If she wasn't coming home, if she was staying, she'd let me know. All the time she'd phone me on a mobile. I said, well, there's something up. I said, she always comes home. What's going on?
Robert then told Karen that he'd actually go out on his bike and look around the pier at where the girl said that there was going to be. Then about half an hour later, Robert returned home with the news that he'd not found her. Like, she was nowhere to be seen, and neither were the two girls. Robert suggested that Karen shouldn't worry tonight and should just go to sleep on it, because she's probably just gone to a friend's house and her phones might have died, and that's why she's not let them know. And then she'd just basically, like I say, just go to sleep on it, and then in the morning they'll all go around to their friends and then check to see if she's actually there. So the morning came, and after a restless night from Karen, there was still no sign of Charlene anywhere. Then came the afternoon, and still no sign of Charlene. So in that afternoon, Robert went round to Charlene's friends to go check to see if she was actually there, to which her friends had actually told Robert that Charlene had left them about 9 PM that night on the pier to actually go home and babysit. And from what Karen remembers, all three of the girls were supposed to walk Charlene home before the two set back off because they were together, like do it as a group, so that they knew that Charlene got home. Karen and Robert both went out searching for hours and hours, just looking for Charlene, but they came back with no success. They couldn't find her anywhere. She was literally nowhere to be seen. When they got back after the search, Karen phoned the police, and the police actually told Karen that she had to wait another 24 hours to officially report Charlene as a missing person. At this time, Charlene was actually 14 years old, and the police were basically telling Karen to sit tight and wait to see if she'd come back. Again, this is totally out of character for Charlene. Sunday night came round, and Karen was constantly looking at the clocks, looking outside the window to see if Charlene was going to return home. Sunday then passed, and obviously Monday morning came around, and there was still no sign of Charlene anywhere. Then Monday morning, Karen rang the police and basically just said there needs to be something done because she's still not home. The police then came round to Karen and Robert's house, asking for any details and a description of what Charlene was wearing that night, or any other details that they may need to have been made aware of, and then the police then set off doing their investigation. The investigation that the police did at first was just door-to-door knocking around, asking if anyone had seen her or knew of her whereabouts, and when she was last seen by them. At the time of this door-to-door knocking, Charlene's sisters and her brother also went looking around where her mum and dad had been, just to see if they'd missed anywhere, because they obviously knew the area from a younger point of view, so they might have known whereabouts she could have been, or if she'd have gone anywhere to like hang out that they may not have been made aware of. But then after searching, there was still no sign of Charlene anywhere. Charlene had actually been excluded from school and was set to go back to school on the following Tuesday, so she was obviously excited to go see her friends and meet up with them because she hadn't seen a lot of them for a while. So that couldn't have been a reason why she'd like run away, which was like the first assumption that police had actually had, that she had actually run off. But yeah, like I say, she was obviously excited to go back and see all of her friends, so why would she run away when she knew that that was coming up the following week? After the police came back with no official lead, people started coming up to Karen and Robert saying that they'd seen Charlene like out and about. But then when police obviously checked these accusations and found out that there wasn't actually true, and the sightings that people thought where they'd seen Charlene wasn't actually Charlene. Other people came out saying that they'd seen her sleeping rough, but Karen obviously said that there was no reason for her to sleep rough because she had a perfectly fine bed back at home and there was no problems at home. I mean, obviously people will have their assumptions, but there was no reason to back up these claims that people were having. Someone came out saying that they'd seen her on a train, and then others were saying that they'd seen her turn up dead on railway tracks, which understandably obviously broke Karen's heart. Like, hearing that news and not being 100% sure yourself on what's happened, and then hearing that from other people, there's that kind of instinct in your mind has been like, oh, is that actually happening, or oh no, it can't happen. Obviously you don't really know what to believe if so many people are coming out with accusations and claims and things that they think has happened to her daughter, then she's going to be really confused and not really know what's going on. Someone even went so far as to bring flowers to Karen's house and basically saying that they were sorry to hear about the death and everything, but at this point there was no like publication of any death of Charlene that had actually happened, so it's all from like rumours as such. The criminal investigation department turned up at Karen and Robert's house and obviously interviewed the whole family, which made them obviously feel like criminals at this point, like they were getting interviewed, being asked questions with regards to Charlene and like what happened to her, really putting them on the spot. So obviously, understandably, you'd feel a bit like, well, they're trying to blame me, like. But Karen was obviously like understanding, and the whole family were understanding that they were just basically doing the job, and they needed to find out as much information as they could. They even went to go interview her grandma as well to try and get any information out of her. The house was stripped from top to bottom, and sniffer dogs were sent in to basically search the whole house. This obviously then came back that nothing was found, understandably, so that was kind of cleared. 6 weeks went by and there was still no real lead on the case at all. It seemed that the police were holding back a little bit, and the report wasn't even published in the Gazette. The Blackpool Gazette is an English daily newspaper that's published in Blackpool in Lancashire. The police then went on to tell Karen that nothing was actually published or printed in any news articles or anything because they assumed that it was a runaway. They'd said this despite not having any reasoning behind a runaway to have taken place. Like I say, there was no problems at home, so like the sleeping rough accusation. And then also she was going to school the following Tuesday, which she had mentioned to her mum that she'd been looking forward to. So as I say, there was no reason for her to run away anywhere. At this point, the police were still convinced that it was actually a runaway and Charlene had actually run off. Several months had gone by and there was still no lead. Liaison officers were going around to the house, asking Karen and Robert if they'd seen her, if they knew where there was, if she turned up anywhere. Then the police took Robert down to the police station and actually interrogated him for about 9 hours, basically trying to blame him for things. At this point, the Downes actually started getting interviews with like the media, so like being put on the radio, put on the TV and in newspapers, and now Charlene was actually classed as a missing person. And now posters were actually put up around Blackpool stating that she was actually a missing person. 3 years later, since Charlene's disappearance in 2006, the superintendent that was on the case went around to Karen's house. It was a Friday and the superintendent actually knocked on the door and Karen was greeted to this superintendent basically with the news that they could be seen at Tuesday at 11 o'clock to update them on some significant discoveries. This to which Karen was like obviously really happy about because she thought that they'd found her daughter, and she asked the question, she was like, oh, have you found her, have you found her? But to which they replied, you'll have to speak to the superintendent in charge on Tuesday at 11 when they were scheduled in to go down to the police station. This obviously meant that Karen had to wait another 4 days to try and find out what new information had been found about her daughter's disappearance. So Tuesday came, Karen's mother and Robert all headed down to the police station. The superintendent made Karen a hot drink of coffee and then brought that over, made sure they were all sat down, and then basically said to them that he had some devastating news to tell them. So all three of them was then told by the superintendent that Charlene was believed to have been murdered. Karen dropped the hot coffee into her lap and took absolutely no notice of it, repeating what the superintendent had basically just told them, whilst this burning hot cup of coffee was on her lap. Obviously that would be the last thing in your mind, but just to put into words and into a description about what the atmosphere was like, the room just went silent because they was all trying to figure out what has just been said to them. They were told that Charlene was 99.9% definitively confirmed to have been murdered, and there was actually going out to arrest the 2 suspects that same day. Karen then returned home from the police station with her mother and Robert and was obviously trying to process the devastating news that they'd just been told. Meanwhile, outside, the media was knocking on the door trying to get interviews from them, but Karen went up to them and said, I will do your interviews, but just give me a little bit of time to just process it. And then she just went back inside and just sat down and just basically tried to process what has just happened. Later that night, the superintendent came round to Karen's house and he told her that the 2 suspects that they thought to have been involved in it had been arrested, and one had been charged with murder and the other charged with disposal of a body. The trial date was now being set up for the following year in the time between May and August of 2007. In May of 2007, Iyad al-Batiki, aged 29, was accused of murder, to which he actually denies this accusation, and Mohammed Raveshi, aged 50 years old, denies the disposal of a body, which he was accused for. The trial took place and it was actually an 11-week long trial, so such a long time for this to be going on. During the trial, David Cassidy, a former friend of both the accused, told the jury at Preston Crown Court how Ayad's brother Tariq had actually confessed to him that Charlene had actually been strangled before her body was cut up and disposed of. Before the alleged confession, David had actually gone to Funny Boys Takeaway, which was a kebab shop on Dixon Road. He went to go visit the Awatiki brothers who actually worked there. David saw Tariq outside Funny Boys, and Tariq had actually told him that he knew what happened to Charlene. Tariq basically just said to him that the girl had gone missing and had been chopped up. Tariq then obviously began stuttering and then getting nervous because he realised what he'd just said. Tariq then told David that she was actually strangled, but defence barrister Ian Goldrain, who was for Ayad, accused David of telling a pack of lies, like that he was lying about everything that he'd just said. Then David comes back saying that he wasn't lying and he was actually telling the truth. David told the court that while he was playing pool with Tariq a few weeks after the alleged confession, Tariq received a phone call from Mohammed telling him that the police was actually going to search his flat on Hornby Road, and basically said that him and his wife had to leave. John Bromley Davenport said that David was a phallus liar and he was making it all up as he went along. David then obviously had to reassure the members of the jury that he wasn't making it up and that he was telling the truth. The police took 5 statements from David before he was actually wired up as part of the investigation, which included covert surveillance recordings. Police referred to David as the source, and he was told that he wasn't allowed to refer to Charlene or bring anything up and to let Tariq do that and see if he actually brought it up and mentioned anything to do with her. David was later told by Tariq that Mohammed had sex with underage girls, some even as young as 12 years old, and had been told to keep quiet over what he'd heard about the death of Charlene. David said that Charlene was actually threatening to go to the police and to tell them of her sexual relationship with Ayad. David also mentioned that when police were searching the takeaway Funny Boys, they were right next to where the body of Charlene was actually chopped up. Ayad was actually heard making the admission after the police bugged a work colleague's home. From these recordings that David had got, and also the bugged home, this was when the police actually found out that the takeaway bosses had admitted to the murder of 14-year-old schoolgirl Charlene Downes. These recordings were obviously found after the police had suspicions about the men, and their suspicions obviously helped get the confession. Other witnesses came forward saying how Ayad had jokingly said that 14-year-old Charlene's body had actually been chopped up and put into the kebab meat, which is absolutely sickening to even imagine. It was said that Ayad had actually been having sex with Charlene before she was murdered. Charlene was just one of a number of white girls who actually went to these takeaways to have sex with the workers there. One witness also said that these people, meaning Tariq and Mohammed, were talking about having sex with white girls and also mentioned Charlene's name. The witness quoted that Ayad had said that she was really small and quite kinky and just horrible things like that, and then obviously laughingly said that she'd gone into the kebabs. And then this is obviously where everything stemmed from, with the accusation of Charlene being put into them. Police targeted Ayad, who was a Georgian immigrant, and also his colleague Mohammed, who was from Iran. This was obviously after all the information from witnesses, which led to the arrests that had been made on them too. It was actually said that Charlene was murdered on the day that she waved bye to her mother before she left off with her friends on November the 1st in 2003, or she was either murdered a few days after. On one of these tape recordings that the police had, Ayad can be heard saying, "I killed her, I killed the girl," and then goes on to explain that he was just angry, to then which Mohammed reassures him and says there's nothing left of her. She was here, she died, there's really nothing left. Shortly after Ayad had admitted killing her on these tapes, Mohammed is then admitting that she had been there in the flat and that she had died there in the flat, but then going on to say that police wouldn't be able to find anything. The jury then listened to another tape of Mohammed basically stating that they didn't have to be worried because when the police went to go search the flat, they wouldn't be able to find anything, this being the flat on Hornby Road. This is in reply to a question that I had about how long fingerprints lasted. He was heard to have said, "Believe me, don't worry, they won't be able to find anything." Police spoke to Ayad and Mohammed after Charlene's disappearance, and they reassured the police that they had no idea who Charlene was. After the jury heard these tapes, there was no real verdict as to whether the men was guilty or not guilty to the murder and disposal of Charlene's body. What came out afterwards that someone in the jury, like a member of the jury, actually knew the defendants. And this was one of the reasons why they didn't actually come to a verdict. And it was actually said that one of the brothers of the defendants had actually been harassing members of the jury and threatening them, basically saying, "Oh, I'm the brother of so-and-so, like, I know all these people," and basically just trying to scare them from making a decision. This would then obviously allow for a recharge, because if they're being threatened and someone as part of the jury knows the defendants, then that definitely calls for a recharge, like, you will be allowed to do that. But there wasn't actually given a recharge, like, there wasn't given another trial. The reasons behind this was that David Cassidy, the one giving the evidence at the start, had actually lied to the DWP in the first instance, and they used that against him and basically deemed him as an unreliable witness to the case. And he had the most information, and obviously the tapes as well. And this is obviously so frustrating, because they've got people who are admitting to the murder in tapes that police have found, but they've not accused anyone or come to a verdict and found them guilty. Before all this news about the cutting up of Charlene's body actually reached her parents, Robert's sister, who lives in Birmingham, called Robert up and was like, "I've got some news for you. I need to make sure that you sat down, because it's not really pleasant. It's not pleasant news. I don't really feel like telling you, but I feel like I have to." So she made sure that Karen and Robert were both sat down and basically said, "Have you read the Metro paper?" Both of them replied that they hadn't seen the Metro, and then Robert's sister basically said to them that there was a news article in there stating that Karen's body had actually been chopped up and put in the kebabs. Karen was obviously shocked and horrified to hearing this for the very first time, and then rang the police basically straight after the phone call, questioning why they've not heard anything like this and why they've not been informed about anything. And the police basically said to them, "Oh, you shouldn't believe anything that the newspapers say, because they lie, they over exaggerate, and that they should just leave it and not trust what they're saying." But then when Karen was actually attending court and listening to the tapes over, and you can hear them jokingly talk about it, she obviously remembered from the phone call about the newspaper and putting two and two together and basically being like, "So it was true then, so that actually happened." And the police have obviously tried to reassure her, but not in a very good way. And then obviously after hearing this, understandably in the public hearing, Karen then got up and just left, and she didn't return for a few days to the trial, because obviously she had to process it, and it's not something nice to have to hear at all for anyone. After the court cases, Karen actually found out that Charlene was groomed by these men for over a year before her murder. Charlene had skipped school, and her parents hadn't known where she'd gone, and it was described that the men was offering packets of chips and stuff for blowjobs and just things like that, in return for pleasure for them. Karen also mentioned that Charlene came home with £70 and they couldn't get out of her where it had actually come from, and Charlene just wouldn't tell them. So they started having suspicions, being like, well, obviously where's she got this money from? Charlene also came home with packets of cigarettes, and her parents didn't know where she was getting them from. But obviously after this whole ordeal came over, they started remembering all these things from the past and piecing bits together and coming to an understanding that she was actually getting them from these men. In November of 2013, it was actually reported that there were confidential police files that Charlene's abuse actually started at home. The file contains a 40-year-old man's admission that he actually paid Charlene to perform a sexual act on him, also along with evidence that child protection officers had actually deemed Charlene as vulnerable to sexual exploitation. Also in a hospital report from when Charlene was 11 indicating signs of sexual abuse, and that her household had actually been visited several times by men who were accused of rape and other sexual crimes. This also included a man who was on bail for sexual assault, who was actually staying with them around the time that Charlene disappeared. After this whole ordeal and the court case just completely collapsing, the two men who were on trial returned back to work as normal and were actually given £250,000 each as compensation. In addition to this £250,000, they were also under police protection as well, so that nothing happened to them. They've been accused of murder and disposing of a body, yet they've been given £250,000 each and have been put under police protection. A retrial was actually scheduled for April of 2008, but due to errors from Lancashire's constabulary covert surveillance, this was actually put to a stop. And these errors in the evidence basically proved that the Crown Prosecution Service couldn't actually give them a retrial, and the men were then again released. These next statements are basically just evidence put into a little timeline of what has happened since the disappearance of Charlene. So on October 15th in 2009, after an 18-month investigation, the IPCC declared that the officers who were actually on the case were inexperienced and untrained, and the information had not actually been properly briefed. Then in 2011, the detective who actually transcribed the recordings, Sergeant Jan Beestant, was actually forced to resign following a review of the investigation. Also in 2011, police officers that were actually on the investigation of Charlene discovered that 60 schoolgirls were actually groomed for sex at takeaways in Blackpool. Later it was then revealed that the 60 schoolgirls that had been groomed by the takeaway workers would be plied with these things in return, like the food, the alcohol, the money, cigarettes and everything, in return for sexual favours. Also in 2011, Ayad was convicted of assault on an 18-year-old girl where he'd actually headbutted them. In May of 2012, Charlene Downes was actually given a harassment warning for basically going out and giving out leaflets saying that it was the two who was on trial without actually anything proving that it was them, and basically stating that they had an involvement in the disappearance of her daughter. On the 10th of November in 2014, Charlene's disappearance was actually subject to BBC One's panorama called The Girl Who Vanished. Then in December of 2014, BBC's Crime Watch staged a reconstruction of what they thought happened that night.
It was a Saturday. We had our pocket money, we had some money. Went for a bit of a gamble, as we used to call it. We had a laugh and a giggle down in the arcades on the seafront.
And the police offered a £100,000 reward to anyone that could bring any information on the recovery of her body or any more information about the killing of her and the murder, and if anyone basically knew anything that would bring justice to it, they would then be rewarded the £100,000. On the 27th of June in 2016, police investigating the murder actually arrest 2 more men on suspicion of historic sexual offences. Then on the 1st of August in 2017, police arrest a 50-year-old man from Preston who lived in Blackpool at the time of Charlene's disappearance on suspicion of murdering her, but then was released just 2 days later. Officers from Lancashire Police have taken 4,800 witness statements and also 10,500 lines of inquiry, but the case unfortunately still remains unsolved to this day. It's an awful case, and it must be so heartbreaking for Charlene's parents and obviously brother and sister and other family members, knowing that no justice has actually been served for the murder of their daughter and sister, and the men who were originally convicted are walking free and protected. It has been reported in news articles that Karen and Robert are both trying to sue the police over the bungled investigation because of so many things that actually went wrong with it. Well, that brings us to the end of today's video, and I hope you have enjoyed learning a little bit more about what actually happened to Charlene. Also, please leave suggestions below of any videos that you want me to do, so like any investigations that are going on, anything that's happened that you may want me to cover, then like I say, just please leave it down in the comments and I'll get back to you and I'll probably make a video on it. So yeah, thanks for watching today's video. If you did enjoy, please leave a like and also subscribe if you are new to the channel, because like I say, I'll be posting videos as regular as I can, and then also by subscribing it does like motivate me to want to make more, because I know that people are like more interested in everything. So yeah, thanks for watching today's video.